Hello. Welcome to PHP Sussex. My name is Yannick, and if this is your first time at PHP Sussex, we are a small Brighton-based user group dedicated to PHP and to web development in general. We gather once a month, usually on the second Thursday of the month, but exceptionally this time we did a bit later because we made room for another meetup, which we're hosting a special event a couple of weeks ago. But we should resume the normal schedule from next month. In a minute, we will be joined by tonight's speaker. So his name is Pim Elshoff. He is an engineering director at a company called Superscript. Superscript is an online insurance broker, which I happen to know quite well, actually, because I've been working with them for more than a year now. Pim will join us from the Netherlands, and he will show us how to turn conversations into impactful software. And I'm very much looking forward to that. But before I hand it over to Pim, Grace is going to tell us a few words about Silicon Brighton, who facilitates this meetup as well as many others in the area.
Hello. It feels weird talking to a microphone with a handful of people, but nice to meet you all. Thank you for those who have joined before, and also nice if we've got some new faces. It sounds like we've got a bit of history of PHP Sussex from Brighton PHP, which is cool. But yeah, we now support PHP Sussex meetups, but also lots of other meetups across the city as well. Probably about sort of 20 or so altogether. Just with a kind of combined overall mission of enabling digital growth in the Southeast. So providing opportunities like this one and others for people to come to events for free, for the opportunity to network, learn new skills in order to kind of further their growth in this amazing city. So if there's any other meetups that you think you might be interested in, or you want to tell your friends and colleagues about, just let me know, basically, or connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Grace Pryor, and I can tell you a little bit more about the other stuff that we're involved in. We're also always looking for organisers of other groups, speakers for other groups, and people just to be ambassadors and promote it as well. So if you want to do any or all of those things, then just get in touch. And if you don't want to do any of those things, just connect with me anyway. And that's it. I think there's one more slide, which is just to say a big thank you to our members who, as of this year, actually now fund the work that we do. So yeah, they're the companies that support all of this so that we can continue to put these events on for free. And that's it from me.
Thank you. Right, is Pim online? I'm going to go this way so I can see him as well. There he is. Hey, mate.
Hello.
You all right?
I am. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So thanks for joining. You are joining from the Netherlands, like I said, from a city called Veenendaal. Is that right?
Perfect.
Hey. So I looked it up. I think it's not too far from Rotterdam and Amsterdam, is it?
Yeah, but no city in the Netherlands is, so.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. So I've got to admit, I didn't know that city before I met you. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it. Like, is Veenendaal famous for anything specific, for instance, or?
Yeah, I mean, the name of the city literally translates to like a valley of peat. Like we used to have a lot of water here. We still do have a lot of water here, but in the swampy marshes that surround this place, people used to get a lot of peat from the ground and then ship that off to the rest of the Netherlands. So that's actually where the city originated from. And these days, it's mostly known for things like fruit and stuff. So we got the name of Food Valley. And we actually have that move into Food Valley ICT, being more of like a technology sector that's trying to get foot in the ground here. Foot in the ground. I don't know how you say that. Trying to get started, and it's not going bad. So some technology is actually being produced around here. And but there's nothing compared to what's happening in Amsterdam and of course Rotterdam.
Right, but there seems to be quite a bit going on there still. Cool. Well, thanks again for joining, and I'm going to let you get on with your talk now, whenever you're ready.
Cool. Yeah, amazing. Thanks everyone for joining tonight, and especially in like a more kind of like intimate setting. I don't know how easy it will be for you to do a little bit of like speaking up. I absolutely love to have this as something of a more interactive session. This session is just like a collection of stories of mine of how I got to the place where I ended up being quite predictable in terms of software engineering. And if you have any stories to share of your own, be absolutely interested to hear some of that. I've been a public speaker since 2016, and this is actually the first talk that I ever did. Out of all the subjects that I could speak about, this was the first subject that I chose: how to build like valuable software. Yeah, why? Sorry.
I was just going to say then, if anyone in the room wants to say something at some point, just like give me a sign, and I will give you the mic.
Yeah, I've got like I'm short one screen. I've got notes. I've got I'll try to peek every now and then if there's like a message or something. But yeah, that would be absolutely great. Yeah, so this was my my first ever session, and I chose to do this session in particular because as much as I do enjoy things like unit testing, that's my jam. Domain-driven design, absolutely fabulous to talk about. I even have a session after I did a little side stint in psychology. Even have a session on things like the drama triangle and how to talk to talk to people, basically. But out of it all. Developing valuable software was my first go-to, and so it's a bit weird for me to do this session again. It's a little bit revamped. We'll see if it holds up to 2022. One of the things that triggered me into talking about this subject is the little conversations that you can sometimes have with even with clients that have been with you for a very long time. So I used to do client work where I worked for an agency. We had a base product, CRM kind of stuff that our customers would purchase from us, and then they would purchase like additional custom build software on top of that. And there was one customer, I already worked with him for ages, for over many weeks, over different years. So we knew each other quite intimately, and he still fell into the same trap, I guess that you could say, as he did at the very start. So we were having a conversation, and I asked him about something that we were to implement, and he was telling it works like this and it works like that. And I asked him, cool, does it always work like that? And he's like, yeah, it always works like that. Okay, but does it really like always work like that? Yeah, it always works like that. It literally always works like that? Well, I mean, it doesn't always work like that. It almost always works like that. Okay, so it doesn't always work like that. Well, I mean, no, like there is an instance in which okay. Do those kinds of conversations sound familiar to you? Those are the kinds of conversations that I had to learn, and it cost me a great deal to learn those kinds of conversations. And the thing about our particular line of work is that we have this almost mental split between two different worlds, where in the one world we're talking to people and they assume a lot of context and they think that we understand, that we think we understand, and everybody thinks they understand, but do we really? And then there's this other world where we have machines, and these machines will have to be instructed very specifically. There is no context. It is what it is. And if you make a faulty instruction, then the machine will just literally do what you told. And that balance between those two worlds, I find that absolutely fascinating. So the software part, I don't know what's like for you. There's plenty of challenges in there, plenty of technological challenges. But that translating from that one world to that other world, that absolutely gets me going. So I care greatly about stories. I just told you a little story. I'll tell you a couple more stories. Maybe you have some stories of your own to share. But when we say story, what do we really mean with the word story? Like if you take a look at a dictionary, it will say something like an account of an event or incident, an account. We usually use the word account quite differently, I think. And we usually use the word incident quite differently as well, and possibly the word event quite differently as well. Story. Something like a narrative, sure. True or fictitious, very important. Stories can very well be fictitious. A tale written in a more or less imaginative style, very important as well. It has to be a little bit alive. Fictitious. Or what about this? Like literally a falsehood. A lie. A fib. Cool word. I've never used fib in a sentence. A story. What do we mean when we say story? Well, my challenge for us tonight is to dismantle stories. The stories that people tell us, that we tell ourselves, they may or may not contain some truth. They probably will contain a bit of falsehood, or at least not the whole story. So I'd like to talk tonight about dismantling those kinds of stories, having conversations with our clients, with ourselves, with our teammates, and dismantling those stories. Drop from the stories what's fake and keep what is true, and be relentless in that, and especially with the stories that you tell yourself. So let's start with a story. Let me tell you a story about one of my first big projects. We're talking like 2013, 2012, 2013 here. So that's, almost 10 years ago. My first big client project. Super excited. Normally, the projects I've been working on were like a couple of days, couple of weeks. This one was like 26 weeks. It was a banger of a project. And at the start of this project, we got a list of like 250 items, backlog items. 90%, of course, must have. 10% should have. Very, very good prioritization there. And this project, one of the backlog items I will never forget was waterschappen. Have you ever heard of a waterschap? Probably not. I think it's a very typical Dutch thing. If you look up an address in something like the Google Address API, the geolocation API, you'll get all kinds of information on an address. But one of the kinds of information that you won't get is which waterschap the address is in. It's because it's probably quite typically Dutch. We have a lot of water in the Netherlands. I heard that there's a lot of water in Brighton today as well, but it's probably mostly coming from the sky. In the Netherlands, we have a lot of issues with water being in spaces where we don't actually want it to be, where we would prefer there to be land. And so over time, like over centuries, a large part of the Netherlands was more or less like created, not from thin air, but from water. We pumped a lot of water away. And so you will find actually today that large parts of the Netherlands are technically below sea level, but not submerged because all the water is being pumped away. Now, in order to arrange all of that, we have institutions called waterschappen. The word would literally translate to something like a water board, but that's probably not a word that we want to try and salvage. So watership would probably be the best translation, something like township, but then specifically aimed at water. Now, the thing about these waterschappen is that completely separate from municipal, provincial, and national elections, we also have elections for these waterschappen. So given that some of my customers, especially the client that I was working for at the time, was very interested in politics, they asked us to be able to split their CRM based on in which waterschap people live. Now, the waterschap looks something like this. This is somewhat old, 2019, but it won't have changed that much. So there's, I don't know if you know this, why would you, but the Netherlands consists of 12 provinces. If you squint your eyes, you might be able to see that there's very vague white lines that denote where the provinces start and end. But you can tell that these 21 waterschappen are completely different from the provinces. So how would we, given that Google can't tell us waterschappen, how would we solve this problem of being able to detect in which waterschap a person lives? Well, there's actually a pretty cool solution for it. So what you do is you go to Stack Overflow. We had we found a service that could tell us for each waterschap, based on its latitude, longitude coordinates of the various polygons that would make up these waterschappen, we would get a huge XML that would actually tell us all these polygons. And we could do a cool trick. Don't know if you've ever heard of or done something like this. We did get this one from Stack Overflow. If you draw a polygon and you draw a bounding box around the polygon, and then you draw a line from the edge of the bounding box towards the point of interest, and then you count the intersections between the vertices of the polygon and the line that you just drew, you will actually find that the number of intersections will denote whether or not the point is inside or outside of the polygon. So if it is an odd number of intersections, then the line has crossed into the polygon. And if it's an even number of intersections, the line has crossed outside of the polygon again. So that was pretty cool, using this this little piece of advice from Stack Overflow, as well as that service that we could get the huge XML dump from. We were actually able to build this feature out in about 2 weeks. So two out of the 26 weeks went into this particular feature. When it was done, we demoed it. Everybody was impressed. Super cool. High five each other. Beer and champagne. Everybody was super happy. And then time to move on to the next sprint. And time to move on to the next project eventually. So this particular product owner, contact person of the client, half a year later, she was at our local office again. I spotted her drinking a cup of coffee in the hallway. She was waiting for another colleague of mine for some other appointment. Nothing to do with me. So I grabbed my chance. Like, I sprinted up to her. I took her by the shoulders and shook her, like, how's the waterschap? How's it working out for you? And she's like, well, it's coffee all over the place. Yes, hello, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you too. Hope you're well. Yes, sure. Tell me, how are the waterschappen working out for you? And I didn't know that morning when I got out of bed that I would have a career-defining day that day. Like, that day, that very moment transformed my career. Kid you not. True story. She told me something that was so mind-blowing to me at the time as a well, let's face it, junior dev. She told me something that was so mind-blowing. I've never forgotten this. I will never forget this. I asked her, how are the waterschappen working out for you? And she told me, huh? Waterschappen? Do we have that? So I spent 2 weeks building out a feature, and the client didn't even remember. Was that my bad? Was that my mistake? It's their money. I want to build software that people value. I want to build software that makes people happy. But did I mess up? Could I have done something differently? So I guess, like, if Pim from then would come up to me now and ask me, did I do something wrong? Well, yes and no. Like, obviously, if a lot of adult people, we're all adults, they want you to build this feature out. Yeah, okay, maybe they shouldn't have asked you. But is there something that I could have done? What kind of stories did we tell each other? What kind of stories did that client tell themselves, such that we spent 2 weeks on a feature that no one even remembered? So this changed my story. My team and I, we decided that this wasn't going to happen to us again, because it turned out, we inquired later, it turned out that this feature was built because the backlog was decided on by committee, and someone in some meeting at some point requested that, oh, it would be really cool if we could do something with waterschappen. That's why it was built. So we learned from this, and we moved on. And we moved on to having a lot of more stories with clients. and we decided to rescue an arcane practice. So most of the clients that I was working with at the time were from fundraising charities. So one of the feature requests that we would get plenty of times was something along the lines of, hey, cool that we can enter this list of gifts or donations, no matter how you want to call it. Can we export this list? Well, sure. Interesting question. What would you do if anyone maybe has a thought? What would you do if you have a feature request like this? What do you do? Can you export the donations that we just entered or that were entered through some other source? Well, what we decided on doing is we started to ask some questions. What would be a good question to ask? Well, I'm sure all of you have heard of asking why 5 times. Have you heard of that? Asking why 5 times? So we tried that for a bit, but we found actually that why isn't the first question that we should ask here. Because if we hearkened back to the fiasco of the waterschappen, the right question to ask at the start wasn't why, but who. Who's asking? Who wants to export donations? And it turns out that when we asked, we would typically get an answer like this. The person that would ask for that list of donations would typically some marketing person. So we settled on calling that person persona Mark, the marketing manager. And one of the reasons of using like a persona is because we don't want to tie it into like an actual person and blaming them when, whatever. Prefer to keep it realistic, but not real. I mean, but something that we can connect with, someone that we can empathize with. Like, why is he asking for this? What's it like for him? So Mark is quite tech savvy, obviously, otherwise he wouldn't want an export. He's used to working with Excel. He's used to probably being disappointed by systems quite a bit because he always wants new information, new insights. How can we get Mark what he wants? Mark would just like a bit of control. And Mark, of course, is a story that contains truths, but might also contain falsehoods. So given that we could empathize with someone like Mark, and we have our feature requests of, can we export donations? What could we do with that? Well, I'm sure you've all heard of something like this. We rescued, or tried to rescue, the user story format. User stories really, in 2016, it probably wasn't hip. In 2022, it certainly isn't hip. But I still believe that 99.99999% of people got user stories wrong. That's a story. But let's wait until the end of this section, and then you can tell me if I got user stories right or wrong. So the user story format, for those of you who don't know, is very typically like as a I want so that I can So in this instance, as Mark the marketing manager, I want to export donations. Why? Why, Mark, would you like to export these donations? Well, if we start asking some questions, then Mark, or someone who can identify with Mark, will answer something like, well, I want to export donations so that I can filter donors that donated a lot. Is that a good space? Is this a good user story? Yeah. It's better than export donations, sure. But I feel like we can still ask why. Maybe just a bit more. Why does Mark want to filter donors that donated a lot? Well, when we ask Mark, he could tell us something like this. Well, I want to filter donors that donated a lot so that I can send them a mailing. Cool, of course. Tell us more, Mark. Why do you want to send them a mailing? Well, I want to send them a mailing so that I can tell them how we use their donations to improve the world. Cool, perfect. Tell us more, Mark. Why do you want to tell these people how you use their donations to improve the world? I want to tell them blah, 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 so that they know that they made a difference. Okay, cool. Tell us more. Why do you want to let them know how they made a difference? Well, so they will donate more. I don't know if any one of you regularly gives money to charity. This was a very surprising little factoid to me at the time, but it turns out that one of the biggest sources of gifts is asking for another gift when you just got one. Apparently, this works wonders. And so people will continuously send these out just so that they can convince people to give just a little bit more. The thing is that user stories, we kind of want them to be not about business. We want them to be about people and how people feel better, how people are helped, how we want people to be. So this one is kind of like one Y too far. The one that we just had, that one was about people. This one is starting to be about money. So maybe that one is just a little bit too far. But if we look at this one again, maybe we'll do that just in a bit. If we look at this version again, then we can actually tell that we're not talking about software anymore, and we're not talking about money yet. But if we look a little bit closer, then we can tell that Mark is the one who's working on this. He's the one who's burdened with this story, but he's actually not the one who's benefiting from this. So if we just make that final adjustment and focus the story on the person that it's actually for, let's see where we would end up. So let's introduce a persona for donors that donated a lot. Again, realistic but not real, imaginative, someone that we can connect to and empathize with, preferably based on actual user research. So let's introduce Donna, the big donor. She could be one of our personas. A very caring, very nice person, but interested in actual results. And of course, as with Mark, Donna is just a story too. So what would our story look like? Well, we would have something like, as Donna, the big donor, I want to know that my gift helped improve the world so that I know I made a difference. We're not talking about money just yet. We're not talking about software anymore. We're talking about people. I believe that this is how you get to a good user story. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? So when we started doing this, it significantly changed the way that we ran our projects. Just by the virtue of putting things into this format and following these guidelines, we were able to almost automatically demonstrate a lot more empathy for what our clients were actually trying to achieve. And in doing so, we found that we had some opportunity of, well, making a difference. We had some opportunity of helping our clients out achieve results that they themselves hadn't even set out to achieve. So what changed for us is a little, how do you say that, like a ordered list that we started looking at that might be of interest to you as well. What we did is, instead of focusing on our input or our output or even our outcome, we started looking at our impact. How was our work impacting our clients, their clients, the world at large? So this is a list that I've kept using and kept coming back to over the years to focus myself on. Am I doing just input, or am I actually focusing on the impact that I'm making? So you could look at it something like this. With input, we kind of mean like, am I showing up? Well, hopefully. Typical behavior that you would expect a junior to start out with. Are they showing up? Yeah. Are they showing up consistently? I've had plenty of conversations with juniors where I have to explain them that if you go drinking heavy the night before and then you show up technically to work, maybe that's not the best way to behave as a professional. And the next thing would be to focus on output, like doing the actual work. It's fine to be here, but how can you make sure that you're actually performant in your coding, for example? And of course, in outcome, we actually want to make our clients happy with the sprints that we're doing with them. But that's not quite enough, because it's more important that our client is actually helped with the sprint than that they're satisfied with the sprint. And that's not always easy, because if they're not as satisfied with the sprint as they could be, it's a negative incentive for us to focus on the satisfaction rather than the actual impact that we're making. But we're hoping that every sprint that we do for our clients would make a difference. I've always joked with my clients that, and it's only half a joke, right? It's a bit too much honesty, perhaps. But I've always joked with them that we want them to have successful sprints with us, so that they can come back to us and purchase more sprints. Very so that they will donate more, but then in our own backyard. And another way of looking at this list, a little bit more pragmatic and practical, it would be like, first is you spending time, second is actually like writing code, third would be like doing tickets, and the last one, of course, would be to change lives. Yeah, and as mentioned before, like as you mature in your career, as you leave the more junior you behind and move towards the more senior you, then you will find you will automatically switch more towards building out an actual impact. So can you own everything? Like, can you be impactful in everything? Well, of course not. There is technically almost always something that you can do. But feeling like you always have to do something is in and of itself a story too. It's perfectly fine to focus, to realize where you are in the particular challenge that's ahead of you, and to only focus on what you can actually achieve. We decided at this time with the user stories to own it. And we invested into learning, we invested into practicing, we invested into applying it. And we think, at least for a while, that we salvaged the art of user stories. But we did ended up leaving it behind, but that's foreshadow. So once we started doing user stories, our backlogs would look like this. We would have a couple of user stories on our product backlog. We would estimate them using story points. The sprint backlog would just be the topmost user stories, counted up by how many story points they had based on our velocity. So we had a lot of understanding at the time of what value we were bringing, what empathy our clients were looking for with their clients or with their colleagues. So we're really focused on adding that value and on making sure that the time that we spent, customers' money, was worth it. So with our backlogs looking like this, our sprint board would look something like this, obviously quite familiar to most of you. Our user stories would be in doing, they would go to testing as we had done work on it, to accept it as our clients would also accept them at some point, and then we would release it into the world and it would be live. So it was all well, all was well for at least some time. I guesstimated, hadn't actually tracked this, so this is like a bit of a finger wagging, but about 10 to 20% of the features that we built out were actually turned out quite different from what our clients were expecting at the time. So we had mostly, almost only, clients from the fundraising and charities sector. So lots of knowledge and insights from ourselves as well. But then at some point we got a new customer, a customer that was not working on administrative software internally. They were working on actually public-facing websites, actually trying to convince their clients to come and buy. So we had told ourselves the story because of survivorship bias, or no, just because of good experiences, that what we were doing was perfect. It worked 9 out of 10 times every time. But something wasn't working for us. And maybe you would already know if you looked at the approach that we've taken so far. How can you estimate stories, intention, when you don't know how the solution is going to look like? Because we were only talking about problems. We were taking problems into our sprints, and we were very convinced, not unjustifiably, but we were convinced that we could always solve every problem. And we couldn't, but we just didn't realize it until it hit us very hard. Almost all customers and almost all sprints and almost all stories worked out. But for one customer in particular, this whole approach fell down. So let's look at what happened. We would have our same board as we would always have with this client. We would do work, we would send it out to testing, and it would come back and be just like, if only, just make like a tiny adjustment. Okay, fine, back to testing. Yeah, it's like, it's so close, but just like a little adjustment. And this kept happening every time. Normally, what is normal? Story. Normally, with most of our clients, with almost all of our clients, every story would bounce once or twice between doing and testing, and then it would be done. But with this client in particular, the stories would keep on bouncing. We actually had, at one point, we were working on item number 260 or something using Trello at the time. So Trello showed the stories, the identifiers to the URL, and you could have like a plugin that would show it on the card itself as well. We were working on something like story number 260, and at the same time in our sprint was still number 20, as it had been for many sprints. What was happening? This approach wasn't good enough, and it never was. We deluded ourselves, that's the story, into thinking it was really good. But it turns out it's really hard to plan intentions. Was it our fault? Could we do something about it? Yes, we could do something about it. We needed to have more dismantling of conversation. We needed to spend a bit more effort on making the implicit explicit. Because what we were doing, we were trying to add business value. And we were doing that by solving some kind of problem. Problems, solutions, and business value. We would write software to implement the solution that would solve the problem. The thing is, if you just look at it from this perspective, then you're actually avoiding a very interesting discussion. And that's a discussion that we were planning to have, well, not really planning to have, that was happening more or less in the moment with us. So after all the planning had already happened. But we realized at some point that if we were to do this a little bit more beforehand, then we could offer these clients of ours explicit choices between the various solutions. So let's say that we were working on that export donations situation. That's a very interesting problem. We've done the user story. We understand the business value that we're trying to solve. But one of the possible solutions still, of course, is that export. But if we spend a little bit of our brain power on it, then one solution could also be to have an automated mailing. That would be a little bit more expensive to create, but it would have entirely different benefits as well. Maybe it's very worth it to the client. Maybe it's not. It's their choice. However, if we stress our brains a little bit and put on our thinking caps and really try to empathize with Donna. What was Donna, the big donor? What does she really want? Well, she wants to know, see with her own eyes perhaps, that the money that she spent was put to good use. Well, what better than to send her over there? Would that be feasible? Probably not. 9 out of 10 times, probably not. But we actually had a couple of those situations where the crazy out of left field idea that we came up with collaboratively while doing these exercises was the solution that our clients eventually ended up choosing. Pretty cool. Make this distinction between the problems that we're trying to solve, the solutions that we can use to solve those problems, and the actual implementation. Make those distinctions explicit, because that offers up a whole lot of choice for your clients. This was another big, big step for us to figure out. See, the thing about Agile, I don't know if you've had the kite model in school. I had this during a project management course in university. Our lecturer told us that waterfall software development is like a kite, where on the one axis of the kite, you have money versus time. If you want a cheaper project, then you're not going to have as much time available. If you want to have more time available, the project will be more expensive. On the other axis, you have quality versus quantity. If you want higher quality, then you're going to have less quantity, and the other way around. Now, the thing with waterfall projects in particular is that the scope is fixed. So time, money, and quantity are fixed. So the only variable that you can toy around with is quality. And this model is then supposed to explain why so many software projects end up being a bug-ridden mess. And the promise of Agile and Scrum was that in this model, it wouldn't be quantity, but quality that would be fixed. So we would deliver software at an appropriate quality, and at the end of the project, whatever features were left, sorry for those features. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of that model. I've come across it a couple of times, and I think it's a very unfortunate explanation of what could have been a really cool model. See, the thing about quality is that we don't necessarily mean quality in terms of technical solutions, but quality in terms of the fanciness of the solution. Because if you look at what we just did, we offered 3 degrees of quality here. One very expensive, one significantly less expensive, and one quite cheap solution. That's something that we can toy around with, and we can still implement the feature. Let's keep this in mind. So how would this look like in practice? So what we ended up doing was something called user story mapping, a technique by Jeff Patton. I highly recommend it to dive into. Instead of having a one-dimensional backlog, we would have a two-dimensional backlog, very fancy. So we would make explicit in the blue cards the epics or products, like a little bit of coherence to hang our user stories on, a kind of card. And then in the yellow cards, we would have our user stories itself, or depending on how you actually do it in practice, the steps, the activities that a user would undertake. And then we could have our actual solutions mapped out and hanged, how do you say that, like hooked on a sprint. So for example, under donor retention, the export donations option would be in sprint 1. Yeah, really cool. We don't want to forget though, so you could click on that card and still get some insights on what the actual user story was behind the donor retention, what the original question was, export donations. So we can still tell from the yellow card itself that there was some tying into what the customer originally asked, as well as tying into what our understanding was. And then we could offer the client the different solutions to work on, either as part of a sprint or below it all as part of the unplanned or unscheduled set of activities. And we would offer our clients to schedule, like we can do so many user stories in a sprint. You go ahead and fill it just the way you want it. So this approach, our customers were very happy with this. This was a huge step up again for us. And yeah, we had quite successful sprints for some time with this as well. So we'd have our backlog consist of several actual features to work on, solutions, no longer user stories, but it would still be tied into the user story that we were trying to solve. So we'd still have that connection with the business value and the empathy, while at the same time have the predictability of the quality of the solution that we were going to implement. So no more discussion on what it was going to look like on the actual sprint board. The sprint backlog would look something like this. So how did that go? Well, again, we thought we were doing pretty well. We were pretty proud of ourselves, starting to feel a bit good about ourselves. But we were a little bit more apprehensive, experience from the past and all. We knew we weren't perfect. We knew that there was probably something that we were still missing. Sometimes you just have that gut feeling. We got a new challenge. It was a really cool challenge. How many people of you read books regularly? I'm not much of a reader myself. I kind of have to force myself to read. Maybe it's like the modern social media addiction or something, that I have trouble focusing on long format. And plus, I'm usually forcing myself to read for some time, and then after a while, I get bored on it. I'm reading like 6 books half at a time. Bad idea. Are you capable of reading like 2 books at the same time? Like not literally at the same time, but read a bit of this book and then read a bit of that book. That's kind of how we ended up doing a project for a spell. We had 2 of our biggest projects at the same time. And we always had this really cool idea that if we run a project with a client, then our preference would actually be to have like sprint off, sprint on, sprint off, sprint on. So our customers would have some chance to test out and work with the deliverables of the sprint, so they could collect feedback on it that they could take into the refinement for the next sprint. So we had 2 of our biggest projects. Both were more than 15 weeks. And we had them sprint 1, sprint off, sprint 1, sprint off, like at the same time. So 1 week we would sprint for the one customer, 1 week sprint for the other customer. That was absolutely exhausting. We should never have done it. For our customers, I guess it was quite good. They got a lot of feedback from the one sprint that they could take into the next. That actually worked pretty well in practice. But for us, it was so much context switching, and because they were both significant and challenging projects, that was definitely not smart. But because we were on a high and we were so confident that our approach was working and was good, we weren't afraid to try it out, and we knew that maybe at the end we would have to take a bit of vacation. Well, it turns out we did. But the cool thing was that both projects, every single sprint of both projects was a major success. And both projects failed miserably. Does that make sense to you? All the 30 sprints plus that we did, every single sprint was a huge success. Everything perfectly within bounds, on time, on schedule, on quality. Perfect. Both projects, miserable failures. See what was happening? We were so focused on running really good sprints that we lost track of the project. Our customers were consistently picking solutions that were too expensive. And they didn't know, right? They don't run software projects week in, week out. We do. We were supposed to know. And most of our clients did like 2-3 major software projects in their entire life. I've done 200 or so by now. So our clients were consistently picking realistic or even big solution kind of work. Whereas if you do that, you really need to switch it up with a bit of quick fix every now and then. And because we had perfectly planned sprints, but no insight whatsoever into the project itself, our customers were stuffing the sprints with stuff that they thought was really cool. And then we still had features to work on at the end of the project. Whoopsie. Again, is that our fault? I mean, the customers picked, right? It's their fault. They chose. Like, out of all the scenarios that we've talked about so far, this is by far the scenario where our customers had the most choice. Well, maybe that in and of itself was a bit of a problem. You can't expect them to make good choices when you don't give them all the insights that they need to make those choices. So again, we looked into the mirror and said, yes, there is something that we can do differently. There is something that we did that we could have done differently that would have resolved this situation or prevented this situation. So what did we do? We offered our customers consistently options for the sprint, but not for the project. So what would we do? Well, we decided that contrary to what perhaps Agilistas would like to see, instead of looking at one sprint at a time, we decided that we would follow the following approach. We would spend quite a bit of time at the start of the project on doing double refinements. We would spend consistently double time, double effort on discovering work. And as the project would near halfway, we would dial it down to doing a normal rate of discovery and refinement. And then as the project nears its end, most of the work would be discovered, most of the work would probably even be done. Because we weren't doing everything up front, we still had plenty of opportunity to steer, to adjust, to gain insights, and to process those insights into a better project. And at the same time, we also were able to give our customers a lot of insights into the choices that they were making. Now, of course, this is like a bit of an ideal view, but in practice, this came out more or less like this. The following projects came out more or less like this. This approach, it helped us to help our clients get to that stage where they could make consistently good, informed choices and not stuff their sprints with stuff that they would like. So because of this approach, because of our approach of user story mapping, because of our approach of user stories, we were able to offer our customers at every level the insights, the information, and the choices that they needed to get the value from the sprints that they were looking for. So concluding, what we set out to do is to own what we could. Not too much, because if you try to own too much, you'll get burned out. If you try to own too little, you might get a bore out. But we didn't just accept the narrative that, well, there's nothing we could do. It's their choice. No. Sure, it was their choice. Our customers were there. They could have done a dozen things different. But what could we have done differently? We wanted every sprint. We wanted every feature. We wanted every project to be a success, regardless of who we're working for. And what we really focused on is to learn from ancient wisdom. Are you all familiar with the Agile Manifesto? It's annoying, perhaps, for me to share this at the end of this presentation when I just gave you like a dozen processes and tools that you could use. But what's important is that mindset. The processes and tools are not valueless, but they are subject to the individuals and interactions. It's that dismantling of the conversation, really trying to figure out like what's happening here. What are you telling me? What's the truth and what's perhaps not so true about what I'm hearing? If you're not as familiar with the Agile Manifesto, highly recommend to print it out, hang it above your monitors or your laptop for some time. Make sure that's available in your visual space. Because the Agile Manifesto is, to a large degree, what helped us to focus on what we were actually helping with, to focus on the individuals, making sure that the user stories were up to snuff, that we knew what we were building. Working software, more important than documenting it all. Customer collaboration, like instead of fighting with our clients, like you told us to work on this. No, how can we help? And of course, always responding to change, making sure that whatever insights we gained, we could process into the rest of the project. So our journey was from more valuable features through user stories, to more predictable sprints through user story mapping, to more predictable projects using release planning. So over time, we encountered a lot of stories. We got to the next big mess up. Well, that's just a story, right? Did you mess up, or is there something you learned, perhaps? I myself have been both victim and a victimizer of exclamations like, oh, that's not real DDD, or that's not real unit testing, or that's not real test-driven development, or, well, those are all just stories, right? There's value in being very close to the official definition for as much as there is. There's value into just getting started and improving yourself. Some developers really prefer to just get a list of requirements. They don't want to deal with all this stuff. Well, that's fine too. In fact, that's perfect, as long as you then don't go around and complain about the quality of the stories. So in all of this, all of these stories, either by content or form, you are the main character. What can you do differently to achieve the outcomes that you would like to achieve, to make the impact that you would like to make? Dismantle those stories through conversations. Thank you.
Thanks for this, mate. Super interesting. I've got a couple of questions, but the first thing is more like a remark, actually. You took the example of the donations, and actually a few days ago, I received an email from like an online journal thanking me for my donation, and basically explaining exactly what my donation had been used for and how it made a difference.
Yeah, perfect.
Obviously asking for more money, but yeah. So that actually, yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah. I mean, as much as I enjoy working at Superscript and working on one set product, I kind of do miss like having those wildly different insights, because I've worked for many different clients over the years, and I've always worked on like actual like backend kind of business administration kind of software. Like the number of insane, batshit crazy business rules that I've encountered is wonderful. Absolutely fabulous.
Nice. The question I've got is, see, it looks like a lot of the stories you've been sharing are from the position of someone who has some agency, like someone who is maybe in direct contact with a client, can really like, push back, ask questions and stuff. And I'm thinking about like the, let's say like the more regular developer who might be in a position where that person executes more than anything. And I do wonder if you would advise these people to also ask so many questions, and also if you have any advice about how they could approach that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's this guideline that you might be familiar with, that you want as much autonomy as that you have alignment. Like if you have a business mission that you're after, then you need the tools to be able to execute on that business mission. So if your job as a dev is to like basically from up high, you're being told like just build this feature. Yeah, I mean that's a challenging situation. However, again, as with all the stories, how much of that can you actually do? What have you actually tried? Have you actually tried to ask those questions? Have you tried to maybe go a little bit up higher in the command chain and ask the questions there? I certainly have been in situations where I've asked the questions and didn't get a satisfying response. Yeah, sometimes that's what it is. You choose your battles. I think that's very important as well, because if you want too much too soon, you're definitely going to get frustrated. Because if you want to make this impact and you're not getting it, and you're not getting it for quite some time, that can be hugely frustrating. So yeah, don't on the one hand expect any situation to change overnight. Like if you just start asking questions, like people might be a little bit apprehensive at first, and maybe you'll plant a seed, maybe they'll start thinking about it. But if you see like no change at all, like sprint over sprint over sprint, yeah, that might also be a conclusion that maybe there's not so much to gain there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So basically, don't assume and try and see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Like there's no substitute for genuine curiosity, but it can also be really hard to show genuine curiosity when you're more or less like just surprised or frustrated. Like, why are we working on this? Like, if that's your genuine response, then oh, this is really interesting. Why are we working on this? What happened so that we're working on this right now?
So there is a question from someone online. The question is, do you think putting 15 days for sprints is a good idea, or is it just another push-up, like a deadline?
So I could interpret that question in two ways. Either are all your sprints 15 days, or is like one sprint in particular where you're adding 15 days to? So let me answer the second interpretation first. Sprints have a fixed length so that you can get used to the chunking down of work. So normally a project by and of itself is too big to work on at once, so we chunk it down. And one of the advantages of having set size sprints, fixed size sprints, is that you can use to how much work you can more or less fit into one of those chunks. I myself have always worked with sprints that lasted 1 week. The original reason for that was because most of our customers usually couldn't afford 2 sprints. But it turned out to be actually really good because we didn't have a weekend to break up the sprint where you would leave somewhere during Friday and then on Monday you have to dig into like, wait, what were we working on actually? Having the fixed week sprint was a huge boon to our predictability. And we would have every sprint try to look the same. On Monday morning, we do the sprint planning. At the end of the morning, we start some more programming. In the afternoon, we follow up on the more programming. And as we start to gather the complexity and start to figure out what's happening here, 1 or 2 devs would split off and do some of the other stories. By Tuesday afternoon, the big story of the week was supposed to be done. By Wednesday at the afternoon, the medium-sized stories were supposed to be done. By Thursday, all stories were supposed to be done. And then we still had like the Friday as like if a counter, if anything else went wrong, then we could still clean it up on Fridays. We would have our review and retrospective on Thursdays, so that if any feedback came from that, we could still process it on Fridays. And Friday afternoon would be for fun, katas, cleanup, celebration. Hugely sustainable way of doing sprints. We could run that week in, week out, except when we did the flip-flop on the big projects. That was too much context switching. So whether you do 5 days, 10 days, 15 days of sprints, the fixed width is supposed to help you become predictable and to help you have predictable sized work to have meetings on. 15 is, in my amateur opinion, a bit on the chunky side because it's a lot to retrospect on. Does that answer the question?
I will assume so. I don't actually know who asked the question. I just read the question, but yeah, I will.
I could see the question too.
On that person's behalf.
Yeah.
Is there any question in the room?
Or comments? Like I would love to hear your. You don't have to ask me a question. You can just shoot me your disagreements or agreements. Or very curious about your experiences as well, because I understand that this is like mostly my experience and my conclusions.
No, I don't think there's anything here, but I do have another question. Well, I mean, you just said we shouldn't focus on the tools so much, but actually I was wondering if you have any tools you would recommend for everything that is like, user stories and user story mapping and that sort of things.
Yeah, we mostly used Trello when we did the one-dimensional product backlog. So we would just have like one column for product backlog and try and limit that to about 20 items, because more items on the product backlog is not conducive. And we would have our sprint backlog and doing and done and accepted and live, and just at the end of the Trello board, all the previous backlogs, so we could still have some reference. But when we actually started to do the user story mapping, and this like 2018, 17, 16, I can't remember exactly, we did a tool called Stories on Board, and it probably went bankrupt or something by now, but that was a pretty cool tool where you could actually like have that 2D view, and I guess by now Jira probably has ways of doing that as well, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Miro is not too bad for this kind of stuff as well.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, but the thing about Miro is that it's free from, right? So it's not meant to track what you're actually doing here. It's meant to give you all the options. And,
right.
Good luck.
Right.
It works. Yeah.
Still nothing. I don't know if we have anything else online. No, we're good. Okay. Well, I think we're done then. Thanks again. Super interesting. And I think we're gonna wrap up soon. But I think before we wrap up, Grace is gonna tell us about a few upcoming events. And I think we can release you now, Pim. So thanks again. Thanks very much. And hopefully, see you soon. See you tomorrow, I guess.
Thanks for your time and attention. And if you have any comments, feel free to reach out on Twitter or email or whatever. Again, I would love to hear your experiences as well. And please get in touch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Cheers, mate.
So there's not much before the end of the year because we are very nearly at the end of the year. But Brighton Data Forum's happening next Wednesday. That's over at Eagle Lab, Preston Circus. And then we've got a couple of festive meetups. One is specifically for People and Culture Club, which is sort of, as it says, it's all around kind of culture, diversity, inclusion, but mainly within the technology sector. They're going to the pub on the 15th of December. But the big one we're really looking forward to is the big festive meetup. So that's in 2 Thursdays time, 3 because it's Wednesday today. But anyway, it's the 8th of December. And we're meeting at the Old Albion in Hove from 6 o'clock. We've got the place till 11. First round's on Silicon Brighton, and it will be all our meetups coming together, literally just for a social. No talks, no agenda. There's a QR code for it right there. But yeah, it's just come to the Old Albion from 6 o'clock, and you'll be very welcome, and even more welcome if you're in a festive jumper, but there's absolutely no pressure at all. And that's it, I think. And that's our new Slack community. So we've just launched this in the last sort of couple of weeks, and we're just about to be inviting everyone sort of from the technical community. So there'll be a specific PHP channel, but also you can sort of mix with, other people about other topics and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of a way of staying in touch in between these meetups. And that really is it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it really. So thank you all for coming. I think there are a few slices of pizza left if you want to hang out for a bit longer. And thanks to the people who joined online as well. Thanks to Spaces for having us. And thank you, Silicon Brighton, for the support. And hope to see you soon.